There is a single-celled organism with no brain, no neurons, no nervous system, not even a single synapse.
It has been solving mazes, storing memories, making cost-benefit decisions, and escaping traps. Scientists just watched it do it again in 2026. And now the world's leading neuroscientists are asking a question nobody wanted to ask. What if the brain was never the source of consciousness at all? Okay, let's dive into this. In this explainer, we're going to look at a reality-shattering discovery that is actively dismantling a century of scientific assumptions. So picture this: June 2026. A study drops in the journal PRX Life, and it fundamentally fractures our whole brain-centric model of intelligence. Researchers took a starving, single-celled organism, a slime mold called Physarum polycephalum, and they essentially trapped it inside a flat, geometric prison. Now, the walls of this prison were bounded by 470 nanometer blue light, which this organism absolutely hates. To survive, this brainless blob had to calculate, select, and execute the perfect escape route out of a complex shape, like a hexagon. And, astonishingly, it did. But wait, here is the deeply unsettling question we all have to ask ourselves right now. How do you make a decision without a brain? I mean, we're all deeply conditioned to just assume that thinking requires a centralized nervous system, right? Neurons firing, a physical brain processing sensory input. But this organism is basically just a single membrane filled with a viscous fluid called endoplasm. So how on earth is a bag of fluid calculating spatial geometry and making a survival decision? Well, the mechanical reality of what scientists call basal cognition is breathtaking, and this brilliantly illustrates exactly how it works. As it explored its prison, the organism probed the light boundaries with these tiny protrusions. Inside its body, it relies on rhythmic pulsing, essentially a heartbeat of fluid pressure moving back and forth every 2 minutes. Instead of neural processing, these physical fluid waves actually self-organized into a feedback loop. They dynamically shifted until they mathematically aligned with the longest geometric axis of the trap. Once it locked in that ideal transport mode, it triggered a localized softening of its physical structure and just poured its mass out along the most efficient escape route. Its physical shape change, its fluid pressure, that literally is its cognition. It's using the laws of physics to execute computations. And here's the crazy part. This 2026 escape is not an isolated incident. Over the last decade, science has methodically documented some impossible abilities in this single cell. In 2016, it was proven to solve probabilistic decision problems using protoplasmic mass redistribution. In 2021, the Weiss Institute found it could detect distant objects through physical tensegrity. And also in 2021, the Max Planck Institute verified it actually possesses structural associative memory. We are methodically watching a brainless system pull off feats we used to reserve exclusively for higher-order animals. It's totally overwhelming when you stack it all together. But what is truly staggering here is this specific metric, 80 to 90%. Back in that 2016 study, researchers challenged the slime mold with the two-armed bandit problem. Now, this is a classic test designed to measure how an organism balances exploring an unfamiliar environment versus exploiting known resources, and it's typically used on brained mammals and birds. Yet this brainless cell systematically summed up the rewards it encountered, dynamically shifted its strategy, and selected the high-quality path with 80 to 90% accuracy. Let that sink in. It directly matches the decision-making accuracy of brained vertebrates. It is vastly outperforming statistical chance. And the evidence of advanced computation gets even stranger. Honestly, in 2021, researchers at Harvard's Weiss Institute put a slime mold in the center of an agar gel dish. On opposite sides of the dish, they placed these incredibly tiny half-milligram glass discs. One disc on the left, 3 on the right. No chemical cues, no light cues, no physical contact whatsoever. But the slime mold calculated the spatial distribution of the mass and overwhelmingly preferred growing toward the heavier side. How? It feels the distant objects by tugging on the gel and detecting microscopic deformations using stretch-activated TRP channels in its membrane. Basically, microscopic tension sensors. It is literally mapping its world through physical tension. It's deeply eerie. So, the absolutely crucial point here is, if it can process all this environmental data, how does it store it without neural synapses? Well, a collaborative study by the Max Planck Institute and the Technical University of Munich completely shattered this limitation by revealing an architecture of alien memory. When the slime mold finds food, it releases a localized softening agent that dilates specific internal tubes. These dilated tubes then become chemical transport highways. The organism literally weaves its memory of the food's location directly into the physical hierarchy of its fluid-driven tube network. Forget neural networks, it remembers by permanently altering its own physical architecture. Because of all these mounting discoveries, the scientific community is being forced to adapt. Over at Spain's Mint Lab, researchers are initiating projects applying human-level consciousness tests directly to brainless organisms. They're looking at something called trace conditioning. This is a highly demanding cognitive test where an organism has to hold on to an internal cognitive trace of a stimulus across a time delay, kind of like remembering where you saw a predator minutes after it hid, just to associate it with a later reward or punishment. If an organism can do this without concurrent physical stimulation, it strongly suggests a form of conscious awareness. They're no longer just asking if plants and slime molds react. They are asking if they actively experience the present. This really forces us to directly confront our own biases. Think about it. On one side, we have our standard brain-centric model, energy-hungry, relying on a massive centralized network of neurons, synapses, and electrochemistry. On the other side, we have basal cognition, achieving the exact same behavioral flexibility, memory storage, and spatial computation, but using fluid pressure, tensegrity, and tube diameter hierarchy. Both models solve mazes, both balance risk and reward, both anticipate the future. If the underlying hardware is entirely different, but the cognitive math is exactly the same, then what is actually creating the intelligence?
And that realization has sparked a profound conceptual crisis in mainstream neuroscience, because the physicalist models have entirely failed to explain the hard problem of consciousness, how dead physical matter creates subjective experience. Which brings us to Christoph Koch. As the chief scientist at the Allen Institute for Brain Science, and one of the most credentialed neuroscientists alive today, Koch recently declared something unthinkable to the scientific community. Consciousness might not be something the brain creates. It might be a fundamental feature of reality itself, more like gravity than like a thought. Koch is arguing for integrated information theory, or IIT, and this theory proposes that consciousness is not an exclusive luxury generated by human or animal brains. Rather, it's measured mathematically by phi, the degree to which any system integrates information. This leads to what we might call the receiver hypothesis. The cosmic implication here is that the brain doesn't generate the field of consciousness from nothing. Instead, the brain, just like the slime mold's tube network, is merely a specialized evolutionary tuner. It structures and refines a fundamental property of matter that is already present in all self-organizing physical systems. To be alive, to be physically integrated, is to be aware. If the capacity to sense, remember, and decide is implemented through basic physical laws acting on a single cell, then human awareness isn't some anomaly. It is an amplification of a universal baseline. So I want you to really think about what this truly means for the nature of the reality around you. If consciousness doesn't need a brain, where does it end?